Great, welcome. Third time lucky it feels. My gosh, it's been difficult to get this one to you. Lots of audio difficulties and yeah, formatting difficulties and all sorts of things like that. But anyway, welcome to part 4, sensory hunger of why is my baby not sleeping? I hope that if you've watched parts 1, 2, and 3, you're starting to really rethink how you can, how you think about baby sleep and maybe what you've heard, what you've been told to do. Today is a really exciting topic, the topic of sensory hunger. It is a really, a lot of people will say, like, my baby's not sleeping. Is it sensory? They throw this word sensory out there. And sensory is like saying, it's such a broad category. So we need to be really careful when we talk about sensory. Today, we're going to be talking about sensory hunger. As with the other videos, this is not a health consult, so please see a health professional if you need support. Okay, so by now, you know the 4 types of hunger that impact sleep. We have sleep hunger, we have food hunger, we have social hunger, and now sensory hunger. And as I've said all along, it's actually really hard to tease these out from each other. We are integrated beings, when we are playing or when we are engaging in sensory hunger and feeding our sensory drive, we are also often with people, and therefore there's a social element. Sometimes we are busy with food and eating or food preparation, which, falls into food hunger. So it's quite hard to tease these out. And I also just want to say that, again, the mother's body, a parent's body, people provide amazing sensory opportunities for babies. So once again, your body is really the best toy for your baby, the best resource, before you all start sending me emails about which sensory toys are better. Okay, so in this video, you're going to learn about sensory hunger versus sensory preferences, day versus nighttime sensory needs, and how to help sleep happen more easily using sensory hunger as well as sensory preferences. Okay, so what is sensory hunger? So the 4 hungers are concepts that I have created in order to make it easier to describe and to remember biological processes that we all have within our body. And that is why I always say that I take a biological point of view when it comes to babies, because biology hasn't changed in many, many years, but culture and opinion has. And so I would much rather base parenting on biology than on things that are coming and going and just really fashionable or unfashionable. Okay, so what I mean when I say sensory hunger is that it is a normal biological drive towards getting sensory input. So you will know that your baby wants to look, wants to touch, wants to feel, wants to taste, and wants to go. Even our very, very little newborn babies, if they are left, they often will crawl up to the breast to latch. They will, you'll put them down and you'll find them in all sorts of different positions. And that is completely normal. We are born with this motivation to discover, this motivation to learn and grow. And that is really phenomenal, because without that drive, we would just stay that in that little newborn state. We would never, challenge ourselves and learn hard things. So I think what's important to note about sensory hunger is that it can be met in 2 ways. It can be from incoming signals. So if you think about massaging your baby or swinging your baby or holding your baby is a passive recipient. Or it can be what you're doing to the environment, so outgoing. So if you think about your baby, moving its hand while it's holding a toy with a bell in it, or if you think about your baby, pushing over a tower of blocks, or shouting out and then getting a response, those are all outgoing impulses or outgoing messages that are coming from the brain and giving your baby a sensory experience. It's also really important to say that it's so hard to tease out sensory from motor. So you'll see in a lot of my writing, I'll say sensory motor, sensory motor, sensory motor. And that's because, we debate this at large as health professionals, but you can't look without moving your eyes. You can't touch and feel without moving your hand. You cannot smell without moving towards something or bringing it towards you. So your sensory and your motor system are very intricately woven. And as the sensory system becomes more mature, so does the motor system, and vice versa. Now, I want you to think about what happens if we deprive a child or deprive a baby who has a sensory hunger, who has this drive towards connecting and learning and growing. What if we put them into a cot in a very quiet room with no noise, no light? What happens to that baby if that is their life, if that is long term? So we know what happens to those babies because we have, a few case studies of post-war or orphanages where there are babies in rows of cots, and their basic needs are met. They're fed, their nappies are changed, they're washed, but they don't get the opportunity to really have responsive caregiving and really to just, have a chance to control their environment, to move towards the things that they want to have a look at, or to give those cues to show the caregiver, oh, I really like that, or I really don't like that. So those babies, they don't go on to develop well. Those babies are known to have developmental delay and also other long-term negative health outcomes. As humans, we seem to need stimulation, novel experiences, and I think feedback from the environment that is saying to us, yes, you've got this. Oh, yes, that was lovely. We need our sensory hunger met every day. Okay, so this is where it all happens in the brain, the sensory motor homunculus. I'm going to make myself a bit bigger now so you can see me. Okay, so here is where the sensory motor homunculus is. The right side of your brain controls the left side of your body. The left side of your brain controls the right side of your body. And so what you will find pretty amazing, or I find pretty amazing, is that your whole brain is needed for sensory motor processing. You can't say like, I'm a right-brained individual or I'm a left-brained individual. You need both of those hemispheres working together in a coordinated way. They talk to each other through the corpus callosum, which is that middle band. And as you can see, they are right next to each other, the sensory and the motor. And that's just because of that very complex interplay between those two systems. Okay, so now let's talk about something that is not sensory hunger. Let's talk about sensory preferences and how it differs from sensory hunger. So when I think about sensory preferences, the part of that I focus on is prefer. So certain individuals will prefer greater or lesser sensory input within a certain sense compared to others. So what I mean by that is some people will like bathing and they want their bath to be very, very hot and deep. And other people will find that makes them feel sick and they don't like that. Maybe they like a much shorter bath, a shallower bath with bubble baths, with bubbles in it. That preference is not limiting their ability to bath. It's not limiting their participation in daily life. It's just how they prefer to bath. Again, you might like putting maybe a bit more salt on your food, but then the next person, that's a preference you have, but you are not going to stop eating because there isn't salt on your food. So I think what is probably most important here is that I think that some people have oversold sensory preferences. So they have said to you, if you know your baby's sensory preferences and if you implement them well, then your baby's going to sleep through the night. So that means, if you have the right pajamas, you have the exact temperature of the room, you have, some lavender oil, the right smell for your baby, you put your baby down at just the right time. When you notice they were getting tired, your baby's going to sleep through the night. Now, I want to challenge that way of thinking and say, I will agree that sensory preferences help you fall asleep. So, if you're on a mattress that is very firm and you're uncomfortable, it will be harder to fall asleep. Or if you like two pillows and you have one pillow, it will be harder to fall asleep. But every single human being will fall asleep when their sleep pressure rises. So even if you're sleeping in a jail on the floor, you will sleep. None of us can just, continue staying awake because our sensory preferences haven't been met. So why I want to mention this to you as parents is that I think we can sometimes be so focused on implementing the sensory preferences that we start to really treat them like a passive recipient. So we are, swaddling them, putting the dummy in, moving them up and down, and we're almost taking away the opportunity for them to be an active participant and to move around, to explore, to roll, to free an arm, to scratch their face if they want to. I'm not anti-swaddling. We can talk about that in a whole nother time. But what I'm saying is that just think, by implementing by trying to meet my child's sensory preferences, am I now preventing my child from actually building sleep hunger through meeting their sensory hunger? Because if their sensory hunger includes a lot of oromotor stimulation and they need to suck their hands and play with the toys and mouth them, and you take their hands away, or you don't let them do that by how you position them, they're not going to be able to meet that sensory need. And so it's almost like you make it more difficult for yourself. So let me say this: 2 babies can experience the same sensory input differently. One could find something like swaddling wonderful and the other could hate it. But that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with your baby. And it doesn't mean that that is why your baby is not sleeping through the night, because they can't tolerate swaddling. Okay. This also links with a concept known as overstimulation. So overstimulation is described by many people online as, each person is a cup, and you wake up in the morning and your cup might already be a little bit full if you haven't had a good night's sleep, or if you've been very stressed about something, and then you drive to work and there's traffic, so your cup gets more full, and then you sit down at your desk and your colleague is eating an egg mayonnaise sandwich, and that fills your cup even more, and then you go into a meeting and somebody shouts at you and then your cup overflows. And so the idea is that you can use different strategies during the day to calm yourself down and stop yourself from becoming dysregulated or overstimulated or having a sensory overload. Now, I agree, and again, this will be in that whole nother talk about regulation, that there are definitely people who experience overstimulation. I work with many babies and children who have got a diagnosis and do, whether that is things like autism or ADHD or anxiety. But I just want to say to parents that is usually quite rare. And also, these children need special intervention. You would struggle as a parent to help them become regulated on your own. And their overstimulation would severely impact your life. So you would be unable to go to certain places or have certain smells or do certain things because of it. And yeah, it would be very distressing and it would cause a lot of dysfunction in your family. So I don't want parents with new babies who are just, getting used to the world, to think, I've overstimulated my baby, I've held them too much, or they've been awake too long, or we're not going to have the dog inside anymore because the dog, is barking, and we think that this is now, causing our baby's cup to overflow. Okay, so this links very much with the kids that I've mentioned to you, who I see in my practice, who have I always say different brains. Their brain is different. Their brain needs a little bit more help to learn and grow than the average kid. It also links to an area known as sensory integration disorder. It used to be known as sensory processing disorder. I'm not a sensory integration therapist. I'm not registered with SAISI, but you're welcome to go to their website. They have such useful information. But what I have done is I've spent a lot of time trying to tease out what is a sensory hunger or a sensory motor need in a child in their development, what is a sensory preference, and then what is a sensory integration disorder. Most therapists that work within sensory integration do so with older kids. They're usually between 4 and 7 years old. And if you read that slide carefully, you can see that it is a very specific condition. Unfortunately, sensory integration disorder is not recognized as a standalone diagnosis as yet. It slots in under those conditions that I mentioned, like autism, in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistic Manual. Okay. So a lot of parents will say to me, what if my baby is crying? They're dialed up, they're fractious, they're irritable. What should I do? And I would say to them, we're going to use all of our tools to dial them down. Things like being held, sucking, rocking. We're going to look at even more of those later when we go through each sense. But you can use whatever works for your baby to calm them down. You don't have to follow a set list. The most important thing is that it works for your baby and that we kind of snap them out of the state and we can start to bring them down. If there's something really specific that offends your baby, let's say a whirring fan on the ceiling, then you're going to use your common sense. You're going to switch off the fan or take them away from the fan, calm them down using like the methods I mentioned. And then, if you find, okay, this is now becoming very limiting, we can't, sleep at night with the fan on, or we can't, go anywhere where there's fans, please reach out to a professional. But I do just want to say that whether that kind of distressed behavior is because of something like anxiety or something like a sensory integration difficulty or, a separation anxiety or something like that, the treatment is never to isolate your baby or to, remove things completely. The treatment is always slow exposure with a trusted adult to help co-regulate. Okay, so if you're now thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, but if our goal is not to have a regulated baby or not to prevent overstimulation, what are we doing here? Remember, it's those 3 goals. It's trust, bond, and joy. Your baby is going to trust you. Your baby is going to be close to you, and they're going to be enjoying you as well as doing things with you. Okay, so why even bring this up? Why even bring up overstimulation and sensory integration disorder and sensory preferences? So the number one thing that grates my goose is that parents start to avoid everything. So that baby that would have had the opportunity to be put down on many different types of floors, let's say, carpet, grass, sand, a picnic blanket, mom's lap, denim jeans. That baby now, if the mom has noticed, my baby's overstimulated by carpets, will now not be put down whenever there's a carpet because the mom doesn't want them to have that same reaction again, okay? It also means that they're going to have reduced opportunities because maybe it's on that carpet that is where all the toys are or where all the babies are interacting or where, there's a really funny clown doing a show. It also leads to isolation because usually then, sometimes as parents we'll go full tilt and we'll say, that's it, we're taking all the carpets out of our house. We're going to stay at home. We're going to phone ahead. We're not going to go anywhere where there are carpets because we don't want to, we don't want to put our baby through that again. And again, now this baby that was already perhaps more sensitive than other babies is now in an even more restricted environment, which means they're going to get less exposure to variety, which means they have less chance of developing skills, learning and growing. It also leads to labeling. So parents often hold on to things like, let's say you visited Kirstenbosch Gardens for the first time and you live in a flat and your baby didn't like the music that was playing, or maybe they didn't like the grass and they cried. They will come to me and they'll say, my baby does not like music, or my baby does not like grass. And I will ask them if they've ever tried it after that time, and they'll say no. And why this is so important is that your baby's nervous system is continually maturing. So something that was perhaps offensive or they couldn't cope with when they were 4 months old might not be the same when they are 4.5 months old, 5 months old. And so you really, again, you don't want to put these labels onto your child that then they're almost like a hangover. They just stick around for forever. And your child's moved past that, and people still remember, oh, yes, your child doesn't like grass, so I'm not going to, it's different if your child has a grass allergy, then obviously you need to hold on to that and protect them. But if it's really just, their initial response to things, you need to give them many chances to try before you decide. Okay, so I think the hardest part is that if your baby truly does have a sensory integration disorder, it becomes harder and harder for you to know that they do if you are isolated and at home and in a very strict routine. And if you're implementing different strategies, like sleep training, for example, where you're being told not to respond or to respond in certain ways to your baby, it is those babies that I believe is the most potentially damaging. And that is because their brain is already more vulnerable, more immature. It needs more sensitive input. And so we really want to, if you're finding yourself in that space where you're saying, but Rox, we haven't, left the house, we don't go to anything together as a couple because one of us is always home with the baby, or our friends haven't met our baby because we're just too scared that, the noise is going to be too much for them. You need to find help. You need to get a health professional involved, whether it's your pediatrician or an occupational therapist, a play therapist, anybody that you find in your area and trust, so that they can help you move beyond that, because your baby does need their world to open up in order for them to become part of the community and to develop social skills and age-appropriate behavior. Okay, so you can imagine that for a child for a baby or child that is just going through life with its parents and siblings and pets, they are going to reach sensory hunger quite easily every day, and they're going to have their big sleep. For the child that's sitting at home in a very quiet, very restricted environment, their parents are going to do a lot more, or need to do a lot more to the baby to put, if you remember what I said, sensory input, or meeting sensory hunger through incoming versus meeting sensory hunger through outgoing. That baby is going to need a lot incoming. And usually what I find is parents resort to screens because screens are really stimulating. And they, meet that need for the incoming because you are indoors and it's a very low sensory environment. The answer really is to get that baby going to the shops with you, visiting neighbors, school pickup. And the reason for this is that for your baby, going from the womb to your home was like traveling to the moon. And now going from your home to the garden or the park or your neighbors it is so enthralling, so new, so wonderful. So you don't need 1 million toys and 1 million different devices that are going to move and shake and jump in your baby, because like I mentioned, what you need to do, the incoming, your baby's not going to learn as much from, because in our brains, cells that fire together wire together. So if your baby is reaching out to touch the grass and feeling it and pushing it in its mouth and turning over and coming back up and getting some more, that is going to be going up, moving up the graph and reaching sleep pressure much, much quicker than if you are taking one piece of grass and, stroking it on your baby's hand and then stroking it on their cheek. So the more of an active participant your baby can be, the better for everybody's sleep. Babies that get left at home a lot, often there's such a mismatch because the parents have maybe gone for a run, walked the dogs, seen friends, done the grocery shopping, and then they get home and this baby is just like, I want to connect, I want to move, I want to see, I want to smell, I want to taste. And so they write down here, and the parents are all the way at the top. So rather all move through the day together and make sure that you're matching each other in terms of the sensory hunger. Okay, so let's look at each of these now. This is the good part, the part that you'll be like, oh, I can do this. So this is using each sensory system to help sleep happen. It's not necessarily a guarantee, but it will help you just think through maybe some of the things that you've implemented and give you the best chance of having a good night in your home. Okay, so as we've said many times before, night should be dark. Dark equals sleep. So your brain is only going to secrete that melatonin when it is dark. And so you need to just think about your home. Is it dark at nighttime while you are trying to put your baby to bed, or are all the lights on and it's really busy? It's important to avoid screens the hour before bed. Any light, staring at any light is going to delay the release of melatonin. So if you are watching TV till 7, your melatonin will only start to be secreted at, say, 8, even if the sun's set at 6:30, because your brain thought that the sun was still up. So with that in mind, you just need to think about the light in your home, where your TV is, and please, please, please don't put a screen up for your baby to watch as they fall asleep. That is not great sleep hygiene. Okay, so there is a debate on the use of night lights once, either the parents are scared of the dark, or they're just, tripping over things to find their baby at night. You're welcome to have a night light. If you research it online, you'll see there's different colored lights with different rays. Blue lights are usually seen as the baddie, red light as better, but you can have a look at any of the sites and see what's out there, what's available near you. Then there's also the debate around blockout curtains versus natural light. So the idea being that blockout curtains, you're not going to be aware of the light outside. So therefore, in the morning, you're not going to, rouse and feel ready to wake up because you've been in such a dark room. So what I say here is it depends. Depends where you live. So if you're in a block of flats, there's a bright light outside from a billboard, street lights, car lights, your neighbor's security lights. Please use blockouts, because your poor brain will not think that it's nighttime either. Your poor brain will think that it's daytime. However, if you live on a farm, keep those curtains open, enjoy the starry sky that you have, and enjoy the fact that the sunrise helps you wake up gently in the morning. Okay. Then what you also can do is, we want your brain to know that night is calming, day is alerting or active. So visual complexity makes us feel more awake. It also builds sleep pressure, whereas a more reduced visual image is more calming. So near your bed, where you're sleeping in your bedroom, or your baby or your children's bedroom, how visually cluttered is the space? How stimulating are the things around your baby? We would normally recommend that you don't have bright patterns and lots of busyness around them. And then the last thing is just to think about, is the place that your child is sleeping at night the same place that they are playing during the day? Because if it is, that also can create some difficulty in terms of sleep cues. So we all sleep better when we're in our own familiar bed with our favorite pillow, our favorite person next to us. And for babies, they're kind of the same. But a lot of us, or a lot of you will say to me, they're in the cot during the day for day sleeps. They play in the cot, I pop all their toys in there, and then at night they sleep in there too. That could be quite confusing for your baby, because being in that place, they're not going to know, oh, okay, we're actually all going to bed now. Whereas, if you had a mattress in your room, for example, and you're all going to bed, the lights get switched off, your baby's going to be able to very clearly see, okay, this is where we sleep. This is, it's time to sleep. And I'm not missing out on anything. Nothing is going, there's no toys to play with. There's no people to interact with. So, okay, it's worth it. I'll go to sleep. No FOMO. Sound is also really interesting, very similar to vision. Day versus night. Day can be noisier, night can be quieter. There is debate around using white noise because it almost creates like a auditory oneness. I would say if you're using white noise, again, think about it. If you're in a very noisy place, it can be nice to help naps happen, but I would rather that your baby is used to daytime noises as part of their naps. So things like, doors opening and closing, or people talking in a room, the dogs moving around. If you need to play something, I would say, natural sounds are better. Things like noise that is, a river, trees, that kind of thing that you would be hearing anyway if you're in that kind of environment. You're welcome to try different calming music apps. They can be wonderful, but the caveat is it needs to work for you as well as your baby. So don't play something that you can't tolerate. We used to play the Katie Melua album that my best friend gave me after we had a baby. And if we hear those songs, I think my husband and I, we both just pack out laughing now and feel some sleep rage, just because we heard it way too much. So we probably should have swapped over. And then audiobooks can also be super useful. So audiobooks are storybooks that are read. So there's no visual, there's no light, but there's a voice speaking, and often songs, or maybe songs is the wrong thing. You want, again, a book that is going to not be too stimulating, that is appropriate for bedtime. Smell. Babies are, their smell is better than ours, and it's very important to them. The thing they actually want to smell the most is you. So they know the smell of the mother's body. Breast milk itself is, enhances sleep. It makes you feel sleepy. There's also some, chemicals in various foods and things like that that also make you sleepy. So I would say avoid harsh chemicals, or either, in your washing powder, or what you're putting on your baby after bathing. Maybe if you, have a very potent perfume, it would be a good idea to shower before going to bed. And then please also avoid unhygienic situations. So I have had a baby who wasn't sleeping, and when I had a closer look, the mattress was actually moldy, and there was a horrible, not obviously offensive smell, but once you actually took everything off under the waterproof layer, was a lot of mold, and I think it was a huge factor in why that baby did not want to lie there. Okay, taste very connected to smell. As I said, certain foods are linked to sleep. They contain the amino acid tryptophan. Those are things like cherries, bananas, turkey, pork. You can again Google it. It's very interesting. But so there is an idea that it's easier to fall asleep when you've had those foods. And they always mention, like, Thanksgiving, where everyone's had too much turkey, and then they fall asleep on the couch. In South Africa, we talk about maagie's vol, oogie's toe. And this is the idea that, yes, when your tummy is full, it's easier to fall asleep. And when you have a nice taste in your mouth, it's also easier to fall asleep. Important to remember that mammals suck to sleep. And one of the most important, or one of the most important discoveries recently was just how breast milk changes through the day, and how evening breast milk and nighttime breast milk has got more sleep promoting properties, both for baby and mom. So if you are fortunate enough to be breastfeeding, you should be able to get to sleep faster. And again, the system is designed as such that you would feel sleepy during feeds, and especially feeds at night. So please set yourself up when you're feeding at night that you can fall asleep while feeding. If you are able to breastfeed your baby lying down, so with you inside lying and your baby latched on, you will get so much more sleep than anybody else who's sitting up and using, a feeding pillow and all of that. So play around with it. It's very messy in the beginning. Milk goes everywhere, but if you can get that right, gosh, you're winning. Movement is also so helpful to help sleep happen, and unfortunately, it has a very bad rap. A lot of people, or should I say a lot of companies, try to say that, if you are holding your baby for them to fall asleep, or rocking them, or shushing them, or bouncing them, that you've created a bad sleep habit. But it's okay if you buy their rocker, bouncer, and all of that, because then, it's not a human doing it. So they're now independently falling asleep. It's absolutely, it is absolute rubbish. Whether your baby is being held by a person and rocked by a person or rocked by a machine, that shouldn't be an achievement at all. Again, babies are in the sensory motor stage of development. Every little bit of sensory input that you're giving them, provided that it is the just right amount at the right time, and that it's something that they are enjoying and needing at that time, is going to help them develop. So what I mean by that is, obviously, I have seen those moms who are in a state and they're bouncing their baby and they're red in the face and the baby's red in the face, and clearly, it's not working. I'm not advocating for that. But if you can see that bouncing your baby helps them to fall asleep, and it helps you to feel calm and to breathe deeply, use it. Go ahead. Deep pressure or proprioception is also fantastic to help sleep happen. A lot of us do this. We might like a really big hug before we go to sleep. We might want a really heavy duvet on top of us. And that is the proprioception that we are seeking out. Proprioception is registered in the joints and the muscle fibers, they're called the tendon Golgi apparatus, I think. They are these little receptors at the end of the muscles as they join to the bone. So for your baby, they get more proprioception again through activity, through movement, than you trying to give them proprioception. So things like a lot of parents will say to me, like, I don't want to get them too riled up before bedtime. I don't want to overstimulate them. But wrestling, and we call it romping, where you are, on the bed and moving up and down and moving them through space and popping them, and they're really loving the fact that they're getting this input, giggling, laughing. I have found that is super helpful for many children who are not quite at that peak of sleep pressure, and just a nice little play, usually with dad, sometimes with mom, before bedtime is what actually gets them to fall asleep quicker. So don't think I'm going to, that again, we were having too much fun. We had too much fun. That's why they didn't sleep through the night. Most babies, they really love that interaction with their parents before bedtime. So please don't rob yourself and your baby of the opportunity of having that. Okay, so I've just here tried to break up sensory hunger and sleep hunger for you in terms of how I understand it. Sensory hunger, motivated to move when awake. Sleep hunger, motivated to sleep when tired, usually happens at night. Sensory hunger usually happens during the day. Driven to explore. With sleep hunger, they're often more driven to connect with you, and that's when you might get your best cuddles. Sensory hunger, they are usually happiest when they're having a sensory motor experience together with a person. So a lot of moms also email me, I set up a sensory tray or sensory box for my kid, and he only played with it for like 30 seconds, and then he was looking for me and crying. So your baby wants to do sensory motor play, but with you. So if you are there showing them all the variations of ways that you can play with whatever was on that sensory tray or whatever's in that sensory box, they're going to stay in that play for a lot longer, and it's going to obviously be more beneficial to them. I think I'm going to read to you now just an excerpt of what happens when there is sensory deprivation, or when a baby is desperate to kind of feed that sensory hunger and they don't have somebody with them. And this story comes from one of the children that I worked with at Red Cross Children's Hospital. So it's called Unati's story, and it's on page 169 in the book. Okay, so Unati was born to a teenage mother. Shortly after birth, she was diagnosed with esophageal atresia, when the esophagus does not connect properly to the stomach. A baby with this condition can swallow milk, but it does not flow down into the tummy as there is a blockage. This blockage forms early on in the pregnancy, but only becomes a problem once the baby is born and needs to drink and eat orally rather than receive nutrition from the umbilical cord. Unati underwent surgery to join her esophagus and her stomach together. The surgery could give her a connection, but as her wounds would need time to heal, she would need to be fed via PEG, which is a tube that goes directly into the small intestine to bypass the esophagus and stomach. It would give her nutrition while she healed and grew stronger. For her young mother, who had not planned to have this baby, let alone a baby who needed multiple surgeries and hospitalization, this was all too much. She left the hospital and did not return. Unati experienced immense physical pain as well as immense psychological pain. She needed to be upright and still, so she remained strapped in a car seat in a hospital bed while her digestive system healed and matured. The nursing staff interacted regularly with her, but she did not have a dedicated caregiver with whom she bonded. She would fall asleep in this position by rocking her head from side to side with her eyes closed. When she was 9 months old, I started working with her with the aim of providing developmental stimulation. She was understandably very behind her peers. What became clear was that, although she was no longer in pain, she had a clear memory of the pain she had experienced. This memory of the pain was as distressing as the pain itself. She could not separate the two. She was fearful of being on her back, as she had experienced reflux in this position, and she was fearful of being on her tummy, as she had 2 large red scars from her surgeries. She was also fearful of being carried, as she had become used to staying in one place. I had to work slowly and respectfully to make progress. The first step was to limit pain by ensuring that the reflux medication was given regularly to avoid any esophageal pain, and that there were no further painful procedures performed without pain control. The second step was to show her that touch and movement could be pleasant rather than painful. The first breakthrough came when she was happy to lie on my chest and push up through her arms to look at my face. Over the next few months, she started to roll and explore moving in and out of sitting. She was pulling to stand and cruising around the ward, much to the delight of the staff. What was more difficult to target was her fear of food. She did not know what food was, how you ate it, or why you would even want to do this. The memory of pain on swallowing seemed to remain, despite her blockage having been clear for months. It was only through a multidisciplinary approach to feeding therapy, under the care of a stoma sister, dietitian, speech therapist, and occupational therapist, that Unati started to play and explore with food. Progress was slow, but eventually her peg was removed and she was able to return home under her grandmother's care. She continued to use head rocking from side to side to go to sleep. Even though she was now able to run and climb and roll around and share a bed with her granny, this remained her preferred way of going to sleep. Once a pattern is entrenched, it is hard to change. But not all patterns can or need to be changed. For Unati, rocking her head from side to side did not cause her or her family any distress or dysfunction. It would be a habit of childhood that she would outgrow. But it would be a reminder of how alone she had been all of those months. Okay, so with sleep hunger, a lot of people will say to me, how do you know how much sleep your baby needs then if you're not following a chart and you're not following a rigid schedule? And I will say to them, you will find a routine. That routine will obviously gradually change as your baby grows, but it's a bit like a dishwasher, right? Like sometimes when you pack the dishwasher, it's really, really full and really, really dirty, and you're going to put it on a longer cycle. The same with your baby. Sometimes your baby's going to have a really busy, really messy day, and they're going to sleep for longer because the sleep pressure was greater. And then other days, there's going to be like barely anything that needs to happen, and those naps are going to be so short because the sleep pressure just wasn't there. Maybe it was a day of, waiting in a queue or something like that. Okay, so this also brings me to a very important point, something I feel quite passionate about, which is that a lot of people will say, no, Roxy, you are making babies dependent on their parents to fall asleep. They should rather be attaching to things like a dummy or a doo-doo or a toy than their mom or dad. I think that is absolutely crazy. I mean, if you just think about the statement, making babies rely on their parents or making babies need their parents to go to sleep. No, that's how babies are born. Babies are born reliant on their parents, and they stay reliant on their parents for years. Humans are very, very fragile creatures. And I do believe that a lot of the children that I see who have difficulty when it comes to attachment and difficulty when it comes to social interaction, I believe that they would have needed as babies more input rather than less. So I find it quite sad when children want to look at a screen to fall asleep rather than asking for a parent. And I also find I don't understand the difference between, for instance, sucking on your mom to fall asleep versus sucking your dad's finger to fall asleep versus sucking a dummy versus sucking your own thumb. To me, there shouldn't be a hierarchy. That child is just clearly needing to suck to sleep. So yes, I agree. As parents, it is a lot easier if your child, say, takes a dummy and they're not, on you. But I don't think you should be going out there trying to trick your child, adding your scent, lying to them and saying, no, mommy's coming back when you're not. I really think that it's important just to celebrate the fact that your baby wants you. And I know that it's easier said once you're out the trenches like I am, but ultimately it builds healthy brains and bodies and relationships long term. So I want to tell you about an interesting study that I came across, which was they took 9-month-old babies and they wanted to see how quickly these babies would have language acquisition. So what they did is these were all babies that were in English-speaking homes, and they decided to break them up into 2 groups. The one group had Spanish lessons for 1 hour a day on a screen, on an iPad, and with the same lady who the other group had visit them every day for an hour. And what is so interesting is that the babies who had Spanish on the screen for an hour a day, their language acquisition was much poorer than the children who'd had the Spanish with an actual human. But when you look at the input, it was scripted. So the lady was saying the exact same thing. But babies, children, humans, we are so much more, I think, connected and engaged and learn more when we are flesh to flesh, face to face. So even doing this talk, I wonder, if we were in person, how much more would you be gaining by being able to maybe just, see more of me, hear my tone and, ask questions, all of that. So yeah, please don't rely on screens or apps or purchases to educate or grow or develop your baby. Most, if not all of what they need is from you. Okay, so in summary, your baby wants to be with you. This might be really good news or really bad news for you. If you feel completely overwhelmed by that statement, I would say you need to grow your circle. You need to ask for help. We need to call in backup. You can't do everything for your baby, and actually it wouldn't be best for them. More people, more variety, more opportunities, less isolation. We've spoken about how people are wonderful in terms of soothing babies and stimulating babies, and that objects should be an adjunct. They should be an extra, not what we rely on. Also, how getting outside makes it much easier to offer the sensory food that your baby needs for the day. We've looked at how you can use all the different senses to build sleep pressure and also to help your baby fall asleep. And we've also just discussed how sleeping with your baby will continue to offer both connection and comfort to them during the night. Okay, so what now, guys? Good news. You can take back your days, get out the house. You don't have to be home at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock for naps. I'd encourage you to stop timing everything. If you think that timing your baby's naps now is going to predict tomorrow's, it could not, but you're going to drive yourself crazy. I want to give you permission to enjoy your baby, to just try things with them, to take them to the aquarium and to take them to grandma's house and to take them with you shopping and see what happens. Give it a go. Fail, and fail again. If it works, use it. If it doesn't, don't. And remember that you are good enough, that babies don't need perfect parents. There's no such thing as a perfect baby, and there's no such thing as a perfect family. You guys are doing the best you can with what you have. Now you know a little bit more. So if you're starting to feel very, very sad about missed opportunities in the past, please rather forgive yourself quickly, move on and look to the future and look to the things that you will be able to do now that you have this information. Okay, so if you want more information, there is the Unicorn Baby book on Instagram, and there's also Ask Roxy on TikTok. My book is for sale at bookstores and online. And then there's also one-on-one coaching with me if you want a parent session. You're welcome to email me for more information about that at roxyatkinson@gmail.com, which would be the email address that this presentation came from. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for journeying over these 4 videos. I know it was a lot. There's a lot more, but I hope that this has been enough to really give you guys confidence in making the decisions that work for your family. Bye, guys.